I want to show you 3 games from the Chess 960 event in St. Louis from day 2 of the event. You'll find a video on Topalov against Kasparov up there. Click on the link somewhere there. And also from the match between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Sam Shankland. Again, just click on the link on the info tab up there to find that. There's been some wacky stuff played. It's pretty random, not just because of the shuffled baseline, but also because it's blitz and rapid, and that always leads to chaos. So here we go. I want to show you a game from the match between Hikaru Nakamura and Peter Svidler, which is very evenly contested. It's a pretty long game. This is the second blitz game, so I'm going to shoot through the first few moves fairly quickly, and in fact they reach quite an orthodox position. So this is the way that Topalov played against Kasparov, and in fact the games are very similar up to a certain point. So it's a kind of Caro-Kann pawn structure that they've got on the board. You can see that after this castling, then in fact the position begins to run on fairly normal lines. So the knight's moving off the back rank, and the bishop does as well. And white follows suit and also castles on the king side. You remember Topalov managed to arrange queenside castling, but this is a far more orthodox position now. So the bishop coming off the back rank, and the knight as well. Queen b8, that's a testing move. A little bit awkward for white, because white doesn't really want to have to play g3. So I like queen b8, that's a nice move. Knight d5. Now the bishop could drop back, but instead Nakamura just plays the pawn to f4, giving good control over the e5 square. But of course that means that white has given up one of those bishops. Knight c7. Yeah, it's a good move. Knight looking pretty weird on e6. Comes into d5. And now Svidler makes a very pragmatic decision just to exchange off bishop for knight, which just kind of frees his position a little bit, actually. Makes it much easier to get in this c5 break. I think here you can see white has a space advantage. That's absolutely clear. So black has to try and break with either e5 or c5. Well, e5 is not going to happen in this position with white's pawns on d4 and f4. So it's natural to go for c5. And that's partly why Svidler exchanged here. Put the knight back to f6 and then played queen c7. So he's ready to break with c5. And b4 preventing it doesn't really look right. c3 looks pretty weak. Black can hit out already with a5. So Nakamura just brings out the bishop, connects the rooks, allows c5. But I think once black achieves this, then basically he's equalized. The position looks roughly level to me. And we have a very orthodox position on our hands, particularly after black finally plays the pawn to e6. This could arise from a French, a Caro-Kann, a Scandinavian, many different openings. And here, well, it was a blitz game, so one can expect anything. However, I think on another day I'd have expected perhaps a rook into the middle and the knight to move, and then the rooks to be traded on the d-file, and a draw actually with the opposite colour bishops. But it's clear that after f5 Nakamura wanted to keep trying to find something in the position. So what he's doing with playing f5 is basically opening up this diagonal. So once his bishop gets there, then it might be able to be possible to play the knight into e5 to attack the f7. square. But of course, advancing the f-pawn means that the white king is slightly weaker as well. So watch out for that. So the rook's doubling on the d-file. So Svidler playing very well so far. Pieces on nice squares. And again, in a kind of normal game, I might anticipate white at some moment moving the knight away and the rooks being exchanged on the d-file. But no, Hikaru wants to try and find something in the position. So the bishop looks at the slightly sensitive square on f7. But Svidler isn't phased at all. He's starting a little minority attack on the queen side to try and weaken white's queenside pawns. Knight h7, interesting idea. Perhaps coming into g5. So Nakamura stops that with h4, and the knight comes back again. So what's Svidler doing? Well, he has found a little weakness, a little weak square of his own for that knight, perhaps potentially to hop into. So both players trying to find ways of getting an advantage in this position. Very interesting. When I say it's a blitz game, the time control is actually 5 minutes, and then there's a 5-second delay as well before the clock starts on each move. So there is a kind of increment. And here, yeah, I was expecting perhaps rook f1 to prevent that knight moving. Then black has to find this move to defend this. And after knight e5, in fact, black is still okay here. But Nakamura plays the attack on the f-file another way. Queen e2, and he's making room for his rook to come to f3. But knight g4, and this is the start of, well, a nice maneuver first of all. After rook f3, rook f6, and this really prevents any big attack on the f-file for the moment, exchanging those rooks. And Svidler is really finding his feet now with the pressure off the f-file. Yeah, black might have more chances here because white's king only has 2 pawns in front of it, whereas black's king has 3. Knight goes back to f2, so that just covers those squares that the black knight might hop into. Rook e8, okay, Svidler doesn't want to exchange rooks, he doesn't want to draw. He's looking to keep some tension in the position. And now he plays b4. Now probably Nakamura should just exchange off all the pawns here and head for a draw. But instead, well, he wants something as well. He creates a passed pawn of his own. Now, there's obviously a plus side to this. He might, on a good day, be able to use that passed a pawn. The downside is that he's left Svidler with a nice pawn of his own on b4, and this pawn on b2 is sometimes vulnerable to perhaps a queen attack, but perhaps if the rook comes into the position as well. But I like it that both sides are playing for the win here. Really exciting. Bishop c5, good move from Svidler. So he wants to play the rook into e3. And that would obviously be a winning move, attacking queen and bishop. So rook c1 from Nakamura, pinning here. So obviously rook e3 impossible because that would get taken. So queen d6 steps out of the pin. Rook d1 attacks the queen. It goes back to b8 and so reinstates the threat of rook e3, which Nakamura covers with rook d3. But that allows the rook in. So Svidler really going for it here. That rook, well, has perhaps ambitions later on to come here, perhaps to b1. a5. Here, well, objectively, the best move is just to take on f2. If king takes, then the queen comes to e5. with the idea of knight g4, and there are problems here and problems here as well. So queen takes, but then that allows a queen check here. Now if the king goes in the corner, that's checkmate straight away. So the queen blocks, but then queen takes a5 leaves black a clear pawn up. That would certainly be the best, but with just seconds on the clock, Svidler didn't see it and instead played what looks like a very strong move. Queen e5 looks like beautiful centralization for the queen, supporting the rook. Perhaps wants to come to e2, perhaps threatening here. Unfortunately, you can talk in great generalities about the centralization of the queen. Unfortunately, it would lose to a check here. The king comes up, then rook h8, and after g6, bishop takes f7, and g6 is caving in. There are also problems on the 7th rank as well. That would be a winning move, but again, with just seconds on the clock, Nakamura played what looks like a very normal, natural move. The knight threatens bishop, rook and queen, but there is a way out. First of all, a check. Now, we'll understand why in a second, but the king should go to h2, which looks a bit weird when there's a knight g4 check, but I'll show you why in a second. Nakamura played what looks more natural to play the king to h3. But after queen c7, in fact, black should have a winning position. So why is that? Well, one of the problems is that here, after knight takes bishop, then just queen takes rook, and black should be winning that. If the king were on h2, then it would have been possible to take the rook. That's why the king should have gone to h2. Anyway, queen c7. Let's see some of white's possibilities here, because it's pretty wild. There are lots of loose pieces here, and loose kings as well. So what about a check? Black can play this, and here's why it's very important to have the queen and the rook placed as they are, because that is actually checkmate. This is white's problem. The queen can't run away. And what about if we just move the rook away from the queen? Well, here you can see why the king is on not the best square. Queen d7 is a killing check, because then knight g4, and then queen h3, and that is going to be mate pretty soon. So the king in trouble. There you go. I told you, you need 3 pawns in front of your king generally. So queen c7, the last move played. Nakamura still going for it. He played bishop takes f7. This is incredible. So instead of doing something about one of his pieces, well, there is no good defense anyway, he just keeps going forward. He's such an experienced blitz player, and he almost gets through. Watch this. Queen takes rook, queen f5 check, and knight e5. How would you play here with just seconds on your clock? And well, let me show you what the threat is. Okay, let me make a pass move for black. What if black just plays, I don't know, random move, bishop d4? Then white can force a beautiful checkmate, a smothered mate like this. I'm sure this is what Nakamura would have played in an instant. There we go. Beautiful stuff. So that's the threat. And Svidler had clearly seen that. In fact, he can actually force mate if he plays rook h1 check here. And queen d2. He must have overlooked this, obviously. This forces a checkmate. He overlooked that. But he instead, in some ways, I'm more impressed by the move that Svidler played with seconds on the clock. He found g6, a beautiful move, which gives the king some room. So I suspect Svidler's idea was if queen takes, then this diagonal is open, and queen c8 is actually a winning check. For example, here, king h2, rook h1, and thank you very much, queen h3 mate. And if instead g4, well, this is easy. We take and g3, and white has to give up the queen, and that's obviously the end. So the other point of g6, well, let's see what happened in the game. Nakamura took on g6, and that's the point, that the king has room to breathe. And now black is a rook up and still has a winning attack. Nakamura played knight e5, be careful. But then queen d1, and that was the final move of the game. The threat obviously is to give a check, a fatal check on h1. And well, basically white runs out of checks here. Let me just show you. For example, here, another check, and the king just runs away to the queen side, and then there is no defense to a rook check, followed by a queen check. There we go. I really enjoyed spectating that game, I have to say. Both players really playing for the win. Both players at some stage could have simplified the position, but wanted to go for it, and that was really entertaining stuff. Their match score is actually even. Svidler has won a couple of Blitz games. Nakamura has won one of the Rapid games, so it's 2 points for a win in Rapid, 1 for a win in Blitz. So yeah, honours just about even at the moment. So we'll see what happens in that one, but entertaining stuff. Do check out the other 2 games I looked through from day 2. There's Kasparov Topalov, check out the link up there, and also MVL against Shankland, again check out the link up there. I hope you're enjoying it. Thanks very much for watching.